So I was working on a pretty big project until it sort of fell apart, which, let's be honest, is kind of my own fault because I could have done my due diligence instead of just sort of diving into a whole huge slew of research before realizing that there wasn't really a video there. But me acting that way sort of reminded me of a question that I get asked a lot. I, of course, don't know how often the average YouTube person gets asked this particular question by fans, but for me it's like once a week, and I kind of feel that for most people it isn't. So I figured I'd do a video about that. And as you may have gleaned from the title and thumbnail of this video, the question is, do you have autism? Not meant in an insulting kind of way, by the way. It just as an actual question, usually by actual people with autism. And the answer is no, but thank you for asking. Now, I do realize that I have a lot of autistic people in my audience. It's one of those demographics where I'm not sure how I accumulated them, given that I didn't really at any point make content that was geared toward them, but I sure am glad you folks are here. The other such demographic, by the way, is trans women. Same thing, never did any content for them. Huge out of proportion amount of them as part of my community, and if you look at my Discord server, I feel like there might be a bit of an overlap between the two, and there also I am glad to have you. Support me on Patreon, by the way, to get extra cool rewards on said Discord server. Yeah, baby, I'm plugging my Patreon now in the actual video itself, because I have to pay rent. But I see a lot fewer burger is an egg theories than burger is an autist theories floating around the ether. Now this may be because I'm obviously rather comfortable with my gender identity, and when it comes to the autism thing, like, especially if you know me primarily on YouTube and on like my social media, I could see it. Like, you're not crazy. If you really, that's what you wanted to see, yeah, it's a reasonable thought process to have, to think that I have autism. There's similarities. There's not nothing there. I have a lot of nerdy interests, certainly, though that is very much a stereotype. I am a notorious offender of social conventions, and my behavior very often causes extremely awkward situations. It is often not entirely clear whether or not I am joking, because of that mild deadpan inflection that I carry in my otherwise very expressive voice, just to keep people confused. I have a somewhat, though I wouldn't say particularly, idiosyncratic fashion sense. I think that counts. The crucial difference, though, between me and someone with autism is that I am always fully aware of all of the social context and subtle cues and ramifications and unspoken norms when I do these things. I just still do them anyway because I think it's funny. I just love breaking social norms and creating awkward situations. Now, to be fair, it's not just sadism that motivates me with this. I actually do think that most people are at least somewhat stuck up their own asses with what they think the behavior needs to be and how they need to be around other people, and I think that stands in the way of genuine human connection. And I also think it's very important for people to always be questioning things, especially the, like, highly irrational, completely made up, and utterly individualistic fiction of what the norms of normal human behavior are.
It's all social constructs, baby. You can change them.
And I am convinced that most people would be a lot happier if they kind of learned how to not stand in their own way anymore, and I'm trying to force them to do that, whether they want to or not. All of this, by the way, and I don't mean like axiomatic beliefs, which autistic people can, in my opinion, be a little bit too protective about, but the whole, like, understanding that the social norms are bullshit is, in my opinion, something that autistic people are very good at. I like the way that autistic people communicate when they are the kind of autistic person that does communicate. They understand it's all nonsense, they're gonna say what they're gonna say, and I have a lot of respect for that. I find that very comfortable to be around. My favorite thing to happen ever is when people are, like, very concerned and pissed off at something that really isn't all that much of a problem, but at the same time the social norms say that they can't say anything about it in the social situation, so they have to make a good face to a bad thing that's happening, but the thing that's happening is not even bad, and the only reason they are concerned about it is because those same social norms that are telling them that they should be concerned about it but shouldn't say anything are commanding them to do so. You know, the simple things. Look, I was named after a Welsh trickster god. It is my destiny to be like this. But in order to pull this off, I need to always be straddling the line, and by the line I mean the huge chaotic confluence of invisible gradients where things get more and more offensive until at some point they are unacceptable, except that's not really a point but also a gradient that is individualistic to the situation and the people involved. Because crucially, there is a difference between being a spicy social prankster and a massive asshole. You always have to be edgy, but you can never go too far beyond the edge. And that's a space I feel very comfortable in because I'm very good at reading social cues. I have a degree of social intuition that surprises me as often as it does everyone else. If anything, I overthink things too much and don't trust that intuition. The only way I could have autism is if having social skills was my savant talent. And just as an aside, right, some of the cleverest social insights I have heard over the years have come from autistic people, so don't underestimate yourselves in this field. I can put myself into pretty much anyone else's shoes if I talk to them for a while, and that while is not as long as you think. And this is such an intense process that it sometimes bleeds over back into who I am myself, especially in areas where there's overlap. This is more than just empathy, by the way. This is I actively sit down and almost alter my state of consciousness a little bit to be another person for a while. Now, I mainly use this in writing, where getting it wrong, which 100% definitely happens, I'm not a fucking wizard. It's more forgiving there because obviously all the characters all the people I am becoming mentally, I make them up. They're not real people. I have invented them in my heads. And it's actually one of the reasons why I can only write while I am alone. As soon as there's another person, even in the same space with me mentally, they don't even have to be present, it immediately fucks up my vibe. The interference breaks me out of the process. Look, I'm not trying to brag here. This is like an actual real thing that I do. This isn't an occult magical ritual. I'm not Will Graham. I'm sure a lot of people can do this. If anything, I have achieved precious little with this ability because I refuse to use it to maliciously manipulate other people. This is another thing where I'd like to believe I'm rather similar to autistic people, and this harkens back to the last video that I did about how to be a real man. I like to think of myself as a person who has a strong sense of honor. This is another thing I really respect about autistic people. They will not fuck you over. Not just because it would be socially unacceptable to do so, but because they just don't want to do that. They don't just avoid manipulation because they lack the social cunning to engage in it. They just also find it morally repulsive. Now, this isn't true about all autists, of course. There are a lot of autistic people who are massive assholes, like with any group of people. But in my experience, autistic people have been very dependable and, above all, trustworthy. They have strong principles, and I like to imagine that I do as well. Another thing that people notice, and this is usually after a meeting, a fan meetup type situation, is the idea that I don't really hold excessive eye contact. So they kind of think that I'm shying away from it because I experience it as being too intense. That's not really true. The only reason I'm avoiding eye contact is because we're at like a big event and there's loud music playing and there's conversations going on everywhere, and I'm trying to focus on the conversation with you. I think this is something autistic people also do, but I do it for different reasons. My attention does have a tendency to sort of drift, and this is one of the tools that I have developed to keep that in check. There's definitely something not neurotypical going on in that big old noggin of mine. The thing is that I don't know what it is, and the psychologists don't either, and at this point, Frankly, I am tired of asking. The first time I entered therapy as an adult, I was with that therapist for 2 years. It helped me a bunch, but he never really diagnosed me with anything except for like some very unspecified depressive thing. And a while later, I sort of shopped around various psychologists to get like an actual diagnosis for what is, like, neurodivergent with me. And honestly, the shit they came up with is wild. I have been told I probably have schizophrenia, I have been told I probably have OCD, I have been told I probably have ADD, I have been told I have way more Tourette's than I thought I did. Every new psychologist offered a different diagnosis, but none of them were entirely sure. And to be fair, if you look at all of these disorders, you might be surprised to find that they do have a lot of overlap in their symptoms. I certainly was. And you know, the human mind is an immensely complex, emergent process that produces completely individual results because a trillion dice that don't even have numbers on them are being thrown at the same time and in every direction. If you don't count the other minds, every single mind is the most complex thing in the known universe, more complex than the entire rest of the known universe. We don't even understand how the neurotypicals work. And then psychologists have one book, the DSM, that with that they're supposed to like diagnose every single person that exists. Of course no symptomatic pattern that you encounter in the wild is going to match up with this constantly updated list of lists created through informed consensus. Psychologists know this. They integrate their own experience into the diagnosing process because they understand that just the training alone cannot prepare them for the realities of the field. The point is, getting all of these different diagnoses sort of really confused me more than anything, and it certainly didn't help with shit. I'm pretty sure that some of the symptoms I have, because of the empathic, like, you know, trying to learn about other people and understand them on a deep level thing that I have going on, I'm pretty sure some of those symptoms I didn't have when I started. It's just that at some point, learning about this, my brain went, look, if we have this, we really need to turn up this dial to create this symptom. And those dials exist in the brain. Even for neurotypical people, they sometimes spend extended periods of time throughout their life having symptoms that neurodivergent people have basically all their lives. This thing up here is very malleable. So I thought back to the therapist I had for 2 years who never really diagnosed me, and I realized that he just helped me deal with symptoms, and that actually made me feel better. Like a lot better. So that's the approach I've taken ever since. And I still don't know what is going on, but I can say with reasonable certainty that it ain't autism. And I have actually been under suspicion of having it by people who are very much not psychologists for basically my entire life. I was tested many times, especially as a kid, because certain people decided that they, having absolutely no psychological training at all, knew better than the child psychologist that they told to test me for autism, and then discarded their opinion when the child psychologist said, no, he doesn't have autism, so, you know, I went to the different child psychologist, and he said the same thing, and his opinion was also discarded. If anything, the opposite is true. There's this theory, and this is not a psychologist theory, but this is not people with a degree either. This is a crack team of elite schizoids from my man Schizoid Angst's project to actually completely change the face of a massively misunderstood psychological disorder that has basically, they're proving that everything about schizoid that it says about schizoid in the DSM is not correct. This is like a monumental thing. But basically, they have come up with this idea that makes a lot of sense to me, that the autism spectrum and the schizophrenia spectrum are the same spectrum. And it's all about how you process information. On the autistic side of the spectrum, you have concretized information processing, where everything that can be thought is a discrete, defined and having borders type monad that is one thing and not another thing. They fit into an order and a category and a subcategory, and this particular thing is only this thing and it is not this other thing. Even if there's similarities, different thing. Maybe same category, different thing. It's like a very tight and well-designed math equation where if you change any of the numbers or the other letters that they use in math, I don't know about any of that shit. You change any element of it, it becomes a different thing that spits out a different solution. On the schizotypal end of the spectrum, you have the idea that everything it does or does not exist and nothing is really only one thing. And all of the things are sort of the same thing, but they are also different. Categories don't exist, they're completely arbitrary illusions. There's only an infinite non-Euclidean sea of meaning and lack thereof, where ill-defined concepts of things run in parallel and don't until they diverge or don't. Everything is fundamentally connected and everything has a different way of interpreting everything else. This is more like a genre of fiction, not a definitive category that can be objectively ascertained. Not even a meaningful distinction, because things can fall into various different categories or fall completely outside of categories and be part of a category of genre even though they share only particular traits of that genre, because, you know, there's not really an objective definition of any genre. It's highly personal, and every individual person's definition of the genre is just as valid as any others. Neurotypical people are like in the middle of this. They're supposed to sit here, and I'm definitely way to the schizotypal end of this, because I can barely process concretized information at all. Like, I know a lot. I have a huge pool of knowledge, but it's all the guy who did the thing and the related to this, and it was in this place, and his name is reminiscent to this other thing, but he's not this thing because that's a different thing. I know the meaning of a million quotes, don't know the exact words for any one of them. Literally right now, I am reading right there, I have a script that I wrote for this very video. And I write out full sentences that I could say, and I read that one sentence, I come back here, I say the sentence, except I'm not saying the sentence, I only retain the information that was in the sentence, not the exact wording. I am hopeless at basic calculus, though that is probably somewhat exaggerated by other stuff. Numbers are very concretized. I have always struggled with them because I'm never quite sure where one number ends and the next one begins. To illustrate this somewhat, the other day, I was having a very nice conversation with a guy late at night who was giving me chicken nuggets. I was buying chicken nuggets late at night, not at Macca's, and he gave me an extra chicken nugget because we were having such a nice conversation. I really appreciated the gesture, like the moment of interpersonal human connection, of the struggle. We were talking about inflation, but there's no real meaningful difference for me between 10 and 11. It's the same thing. What matters to me is that he liked me enough to put an extra 11th nugget in the box. And that's how I think about all of numbers. But on this whole spectrum thing, you might think it's a bit of a problem with the theory that there's people who have both autism and like a schizotypal disorder, which is some horseshoe theory bullshit, but in my mind that makes perfect sense. I am just not bothered by the idea that something and its precise diametrical opposite can be equally true at the same time. And yeah, look, all of this just really comes down to saying, I don't have autism. I understand why people think I have autism, but I don't. I'm a massive weirdo, and people hone in on that pretty quick, but I'm a different kind of weirdo. And that's a compliment, by the way. I really like autistic people, in case that hasn't become clear throughout the course of this video. I find them very comfortable to be around a lot of the time because I'm good at things that they're not good at, and they're good at things that I'm not good at. Sometimes they annoy me because they didn't get some subtle remark and felt the need to comment on the joke that was meant obviously only for me, but let's be honest, it's not like neurotypicals would have picked up on that shit either. And also, me and the autists, we're different from most people, only in different ways, so we have that in common. And yeah, that's it. That's basically my filler video, because I wasted a fucking week's worth of research Because I'm an idiot. Thank you very much for watching this video. Like, comment, subscribe, share this to your relevant communities, but do not spam them. Consider supporting me on Patreon or Subscribestar, buying some of my merchandise or my short story collection. And in that spirit, if you have the neurodivergence, and also if you have the neurotypicality, but mainly if you have the neurodivergence, rock on, individual. See you around, cunts.